Good evening, everyone. We have people continuing to join us, but we do want to start because we want to give Dr. Meeks enough time. Thank you for being here this evening. My name is Karis Bhagyanathan, and I'm the Director of Communications at the Episcopal Church Foundation. ECF is an independent, lay-led organization that helps congregations, dioceses, and other Episcopal communities of faith engage in visioning and planning, develop leadership, and raise and manage resources for ministry. ECF's programs, products, and services help congregations respond to the changing needs of the Episcopal Church in the 21st century. I hope you all are well during this particularly heavy and difficult time and doing what you can to hold on to hope. I'd like to open us with a short prayer. Grant us, Lord God, a vision of our world as your love would make it. A world where the weak are protected and none go hungry or poor. A world where the benefits of abundant life are shared and everyone can enjoy them. A world where different races and cultures live in tolerance and mutual respect. A world where peace is built with justice and justice is guided by love. And give us the inspiration and the courage to build it. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Before we begin, just a brief couple of notes about this time together. Please feel free to use the chat function to add any questions that you would like Dr. Meeks to answer. After she addresses us, we'll have a good amount of time for her to take your questions, so please feel free to add them as we progress. This session will also be recorded and it'll be available on our Vital Practices website after the event. And so now on behalf of the President and the Board of Directors of the Episcopal Church Foundation, I welcome you to this evening of learning and reflection with Dr. Catherine Meeks. Dr. Meeks is Executive Director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing. Prior to the center's opening, she chaired its precursor, Beloved Community, Commission for Dismantling Racism for the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta. A sought-after teacher, workshop leader, Dr. Meeks brings 4 decades of experience to the work of transforming the dismantling racism work in Atlanta. The core of her work has been with people who've been marginalized because of economic status, race, gender, or physical ability, as they pursue liberation, justice, and access to resources that can help lead them to health, wellness, and a more abundant life. This work grows out of her understanding of her call to the vocation of teacher, as well as her realization that all of humanity is one family, which God desires to unite. And so with that, Dr. Meeks, it is my honor to welcome you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here. I'm so honored to be asked to participate tonight in having some words to say to you as you gather and work on the business of being faithful in the world in all of the various ways that people who are represented here might be engaging that. I want to begin by reading a piece of poetry to you because I believe that poetry is, as one of my poet friends has said, a language against which there is no defense. And I think that poetry gets at the heart of matters much quicker than prose. And it's also sometimes, I believe, has the capacity to continue to work on us after we have heard it, and long after we have thought we were finished with it, it's not necessarily finished with us. This poem is called Lost, and it's a poem that's inspired by a little a little indigenous boy asking his grandfather, what do you do if you're lost in the forest? And I think that as we navigate this era of pandemics, we find ourselves being sort of like this little boy, feeling lost in the forest. Which way do we go? We have the pandemics of COVID and fires and floods and hurricanes and storms and racial unrest. And it's a time to really take stock, to really try to see if we can find where is the core place that we can stand and not have to feel like that the wind is going to blow us away. And so this poem speaks to this so profoundly. And the little boy is saying, "Grandfather, what do you do when you're lost in the forest?" That was the question that he put. And this is the answer. You stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes, listen, it answers. I have made this place around you, and if you leave it, you may come back again saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. And I just think that one of the most powerful images for me is the image of they tell me that if you get to the center of a hurricane, that it's still. That, you know, if you're out in it, you're whirling and swirling and everything's gone crazy. But if you can make your way to the center, it's quietness there. And I think that one of the most important things that we all could do as we are confronted with the challenges of pandemics. And, you know, one of the things that it's important to do is stand still long enough to know that we're not the first generation of people that have had to deal with trouble. I mean, sometimes we act as if trouble we've never heard of it. And then when we see it, it's like, oh my God, what do we do? And we lose our sense of self and bearings and everything. So I think it's really important to, in the process of standing still, to do some taking stock of ourselves and kind of reassessing what are the skills and talents, what do I know about myself, and what do I know for certain that would help me be able to navigate this space. I think it's so important to question ourselves and to pay attention to what's in front of us and ask, what is this really about? So one of the questions that I have for you tonight is to ask you to reflect upon this whole era of this pandemic era as an invitation. What is the invitation that's being given to all of us by this set of challenges? Because there's always going to be one challenge or another. And every challenge, I think, is an invitation for us to stand a little taller, to turn our faces once again to God and with a greater intentionality, and to become more clearly what God imagined when God put us on the earth. So if you think about that, if you think that this is not just the craziest thing you've ever heard, and you really want to reflect upon this question, what would you think about this era as in terms of being an invitation? And if it's an invitation, what is it an invitation to do for you personally? For me personally, it's an invitation to take stock, to reevaluate, to pay attention to the things that I've said matter and are important, to interrogate those premises that I say that my life is built upon, and to see if those premises will hold up in this challenge, rather than trying to kind of cover my head and say, well, let me just see if I can keep my head down and get through this time. I don't need to keep my head down and try to get through this time. I need to hold my head up and need to see if I have said yes to the right invitations before this time that will help me to get through now. So this is, as the poem has said, the place where you are is here, and you must engage here. When we first entered into the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of energy being spent on the parts of many of the people that I was in contact with around the notion of, if we can just hold on, we can get back to normal. If we can just, if we can just ride this out, we can get to the place where we won't have to social distance and we won't have to wear masks. And if we can just get all the Black and brown folks that are unsatisfied to put themselves, get back where they used to be, and we can just get back to our church meetings and doing all the things we're used to doing, and everything will be normal and life will be fine. Well, the real truth is, there is no going back. There is no going back, because this is here. This place where we are is here, and we can go from here, but we cannot go back to there, wherever there was. So what do we do then in the face of this? Do we sit in despair? Do we throw up our hands? Do we become immobilized? Do we become angry? Do we project onto other people? Do we try to look for folks to blame? What do we do? What is the response going to be? I believe that God is expecting us to pay attention. I believe that God is expecting us to allow God's voice to be heard in the midst of these trying times, and to see what is the clear message for all of us as we go forward. One of the things that I think is happening is, God will do some interesting things to you. We make claims about who we are as a people in this land, particularly people of faith. And so perhaps one of the invitations that's being offered to us in this period of chaos is the invitation to find out, do we really believe what we say we believe? Do we really, at the bottom of our hearts, believe those things we have camped out around? Are we really ready to be people who will work for peace and justice and respect the dignity of every human being on this earth? Because that is what we say. That is what we have said. We have signed on for as people of faith. And in our baptismal covenant is that those words are right out of the baptismal covenant. What does that mean? And am I really ready to stand in that space, or am I looking for an alternative? And opportunities, this kind of situation presents me and you the opportunity to find out, do you really mean it? There's, so I'm really coming to, I've been thinking about this a lot, but it's getting clearer and clearer to me the more I think about it, and the older I get and the further down the road I go. I don't want to be saying words that I really don't want to live into. So if I'm saying that I believe that we're one family, that everybody here is made up of God's family, and God loves everybody, and God is interested in everybody having the best life they can have, then I best be trying to see how I can live that way. Because there are no exceptions. And no matter how much I want to make exceptions, and no matter how many folks I want to load on a spaceship and send them on a one-way trip to outer space because I don't want to have to be bothered with them, it doesn't matter, because God loves those people as much as God loves me, and God expects me to turn my face to God so I can get my own self on the right track about them. And there are days when I don't like that. I wish I didn't know that. Because, some days you just want to be as reprobate as you want to be, and you don't want to have to practice the stuff that you got to come back to. It's okay. You can have a little bit of let me just pretend like I don't really know this stuff, but I do know it. And ultimately, I'm going to have to, if I want to keep living my life with integrity, I'm going to have to practice it. But I can take a little vacation in my head for a minute, maybe, but then I got to get back on the pathway. So when I'm back on the pathway, then I know that God is asking me to be clear about what I say I really believe, and to stand in it with absolute firmness. And, we're so fortunate, we who live here in the United States are not being asked to give our lives up for our faith, not in a physical sense. I mean, nobody's going to threaten us for having this meeting and talking about Jesus and talking about faith, as could happen perhaps in some parts of the world. So then what is the challenge to us? It's basically the challenge of giving up comfort giving up the status quo, giving up things that the way I think they should be, rather than being willing to embrace them as they really are. So when people were trying to see if they could just wait until we get past COVID-19 and racial unrest, and maybe even some of the fires and floods and all of the climate issues, they really basically were saying, can I just skip over the present? Can you let me skip over being here? Because I don't want to be here. I want to go there. I want to jump from present to future. But we all know that trying to go from present to future does not work. And the only real preparation for the future is to totally engage the present. That is the only real preparation. It is not having a whole bunch of money or trying to have a whole bunch of power or trying to guard against all the possible things that might happen. That doesn't prepare you to have to live in the space that's going to be presented to you as you go down the road. What prepares you is to learn how to live in the present. Learn how to live in the present and live in the present with peace and joy. Learn how to live in the present with courage and faith and a willingness to be obedient. So stand still. Stand still, you people, in the midst of pandemics. Stand still, world, and pay attention. Stand still and ask, what is this all about? What is it that we need to learn? Now, I'm not going to sit here and say, I think God sent all these things to us. I mean, I'm not trying to get into all of that. What I want to say is that whatever the circumstances are that we find ourselves in, those are the circumstances that we have to embrace. And people who need to try to decide, well, God's doing this, and God, I don't always know what God is doing, except that I know God is expecting me to remember that I made a promise to be on the path with God and to trust that God would meet me there. That's something I can be really clear about. And sometimes the call is confusing, and sometimes it takes some standing still and hearing it again and trying to realign ourselves and get back on the pathway. I would like you to ask yourselves, who do you want to be when COVID has gone? Who do you want to be? COVID-19 is not going to be here forever, because nothing like this lasts forever. We don't know what will come next, and we don't need to concern ourselves about that. But what we do know is that things change. And so when we can be back into not having to be so concerned about social distancing, and we can not have to be so concerned about wearing masks and all of that, what kind of person do you want to be? One of the things that we can be certain of, we will not be the same person we were before this happened. So if someone is just trying to just hold on to what I used to be and still has that idea of, I'm going to just go back to being the way I was, I want to tell you that your life won't fit into that space anymore, because we have been through something that has reshaped us in ways so that we cannot fit into that old way of being, that old way of thinking, that old way of trying to embrace here. Because here now is a different place and requires us to allow ourselves to be reshaped. Jesus was always, I love that I finally have come to understand that Jesus is always talking about 2 or 3 things at once, telling you a little story and making it sound all simple. And then you start working on it and it's just got layers and layers and layers. And when Jesus talks about putting, wine in the new wine in the old wineskins, we just maybe can take that in a lot of different ways. But for me, I think, well, let me think about how am I trying to cram my life today in my yesterday's garment. Yesterday was yesterday, and I had what I needed for yesterday. This is a new day. Tomorrow's a day that I haven't seen before. And so, yes, I will know some things that I can carry with me from yesterday to today to tomorrow, but I must always be open to the possibility that my clothing needs to grow. My conversation needs to be enlarged. I need to allow myself to be open to whatever the new awakenings are that God has in mind for me. You know, I've spent 50 years of my life working for to try to help facilitate racial healing in this country. I grew up in Arkansas with an illiterate sharecropping father and a mother who graduated from college the year that I graduated from high school. My father used to take me with him and let me, he would make an X and then I would write his name because he couldn't read or write. He would let me sit on his lap and read to him, even though he didn't know whether I was reading correctly or not. And my mother never told me that education was important, but she didn't ever have to, because I watched her struggle for 18 years to get her bachelor's degree. And I graduated in the summer of 1964, and my mother graduated a couple of months after that with her college degree. And I grew up in Arkansas, left Arkansas, went to California, making the absolute a declaration to God and the whole universe that I would never set foot in the South again. And then about 8 years later, I moved to Georgia. So one should be very careful about making such declarations, because it became clear to me that I needed to live in Arkansas, leave from California and come back to the South. It was the call that I responded to come back here, come back to the South, that was really a very important saying yes thing for me, because I needed to be in this space in order to become the person that I am, and in order to do the work that I am called to do. I needed to live here in this space in the South, not in Los Angeles, not in New York, not in Chicago, in some big urban area. But right now I do live in Atlanta now, but I lived in Macon, Georgia, which is about 80 miles south of Atlanta, for a good long while, in a fairly small town, 100,000 people. And I learned to be dependent upon God. I learned to realize that I'm in over my head when I'm walking with God, and my God's strength is made perfect in my weakness. And I must never forget that. I must never allow myself to be separated from that. So when coming to absolute understanding of that, coming to the space that is grounded deep in my heart and soul, makes it possible then not to be blown by every wind that comes by, makes it possible to embrace a pandemic with some sense of it ultimately will be all right. You know, the psalmist says in the 139th Psalm, where can I go to get away from God? You know, nowhere, there's nowhere to go to get away from God. And if I can't get away from God, and if God's not going to forsake me, then there's no way that I won't be all right. So if you feel like you're going to be blown off the planet because of the multiple pandemics and all of the things that are hard for you to navigate, if you feel like that those things are going to blow you away, you need to stand still and explore the depths of yourself and see to whom you have made your allegiance and to what. Because if you don't come to grips with this major question of what is the core principle that runs my life, you will then always be like a tumbleweed. You know, the tumbleweeds you've seen, maybe I don't know, folks, how many people watch Westerns anymore. I haven't watched one in a very long time, but I do remember that they used to always have the town would be tumbleweeds in the town blowing, you know, and they just catch everything they pass by, but they just collect everything because they can't really differentiate. We can live our lives like tumbleweed, or we can live our lives grounded with roots in the ground, and the wind comes and blows us over, but doesn't blow us away. How do you keep yourself from being blown away, even though you may be blown over? It does not matter how much education you have. It does not matter how much money you have. It does not matter how beautiful you are. It doesn't matter how ugly you are. It doesn't matter how many friends you have. Nothing matters if you don't have a sense of yourself as a grounded person who can live, if you had to, all by yourself, because you have a concept of who you are and to whom you have made your allegiance. If you are standing with God, you can live your life. Now, nobody wants to live that way, I don't think. I mean, I don't want to be a hermit or any of those, people living all by myself somewhere. But the point is to come to the place of loving myself, understanding myself, and being able to be at peace no matter what the circumstances. So how do we navigate this space? And what do we do about one of the biggest, perhaps the biggest pandemic is the racial woundedness one, which has been around since the 15th century. I mean, we talk about, when the slaves came in 1619, we talk about that kind of being a starting place with slavery. But actually, we started way before that in the 15th century when the explorers showed up on these shores and looked at the native people and decided they weren't really people and that they could do whatever they wanted to them. That was when the racial pandemic got started. And it's just now kind of coupled itself with the pandemic of COVID and the climate issues. And so all of those things together seem incredibly overwhelming. And even though I've been doing this work for over 50 years, I understand the challenges that it presents. So I'm not here to say that there are no challenges. I'm here to say that God is present, called or not called, God is present. And understanding that and living our lives in affirmation of that is the way we make it through the world, looking like somebody who can have some sense about how to make it, rather than looking like we're people that's just going to be blown away because everything is hard. And then the other thing is, another thing that I want to say, because I really think this is very important. It is very important to differentiate between being inconvenienced and having to deal with disaster. We folks who have so much comfort and so many wonderful resources available to us can get so quickly from everything's okay to I'm in the midst of a disaster. And a lot of the time, the only thing that we're really in is a space of being inconvenienced. If you have a flat tire, that's not a disaster. If you have a wreck and your leg is broken, that's closer to a disaster. But you still aren't dead. So you should be careful even with naming that as a disaster. So it was very liberating to me when I finally started trying to differentiate between disasters and inconvenience. It was very liberating because then I started learning to pay attention to the inconveniences as invitations. Because sometimes the inconvenience caused me to slow down, to pay attention, and something else happened that was valuable that would not have happened if I hadn't slowed down. You see, I want to make the biggest point here about this whole space that we find ourselves in. I want this big point to be what stays with you, that you can see this whole time as a disaster. You can see it as the most horrible time you've ever lived, or you can see it as an invitation. You can look at the chaos and say, I need to be paying attention to what I'm being asked to do now, because all of us are being asked to do something. All of us are responsible. All of us have been called. We've been put on the earth. We have a purpose. We have things to do. Your purpose may not be anything like mine, and it's important not to get caught in that trap of trying to do what somebody else is doing. It's important to pay attention to what you are supposed to be doing. I do a lot of work as a part of the work of the center, I do a lot of work with people all across the country around racial healing. And sometimes I talk to people that are like in their 80s and 90s, and they say to me, well, you know, I'm this old and I live in a assisted living or wherever. And I don't, what can I do? I can't do anything really to try to make anything better, because they think they need to go out and protest or go, you know, lead a march somewhere or something. And I'm so grateful to be able to say to them, the most important thing you can do is listen carefully to see what God asks you to do and make a faithful response to that invitation. You know, so sometimes maybe what you need to do is sit in your room and think good thoughts, because you don't know exactly how God is planning on working everything out. I mean, none of us do. But what we do know is that we need to do what we can, and we need to do it faithfully and with a great willingness to be at peace about it. Stand still. Stand still, because wherever you are is here. Stand still, because the trees are not lost. Stand still, and when you stand still, you may not be lost either. When you stand still and pay attention. You know, have you ever gone into a dark room, just a really dark room, and you can't make sense out of anything because it's dark? But if you will stand there for a little bit, you will adjust to the darkness. And after a while, you can navigate in the darkness. You can make sense. You can avoid the furniture. You can kind of figure out a path in the darkness. It is so amazing to me how that happens. And so I want to today I was thinking a lot about doing this talk, and I was thinking, you know, we talk so much, we say so many words, and people, we're all weary from having to making all the responses, particularly to COVID. I have probably not been out of my house 20 times in the last 6 or 7 months. And so it's wearying. And so what can we do to really inspire each other? How can we help one another really have another little spark of energy, another few more steps toward actually feeling like we can keep on doing what we need to do? And we can do better than just survive. We can do it with hope in our hearts. We can do it with joy. We can do it with peace. And so I thought, you know, I want to try to be able to say some things that can really encourage people in their journeys, because life is a pilgrimage. Life is a pilgrimage. We live in a culture that is so preoccupied with destinations. It's always about, what is the destination? Where am I trying to get? You know, got to get out of high school. I got to get out of college. I got to get married. Destination, destination, destination. Always a destination. But life is about the pilgrimages to the frontier. And when you get to the frontier, there's always another frontier, because life is a pilgrimage. And when we can walk through life as pilgrims and accept the invitations that are being presented to us, we can find joy in just living. You know, I get up in the mornings and think, oh, this is a day I haven't seen before. I wonder what it will be like. And what will I learn today? And what new understanding will I have today? How will God meet me today? And what will God bring to my life today, no matter where I happen to be standing? So I hope that these words will help you, you know, to just be a little more courageous. My poet friend, David White, talks about being a half a shade braver. You know, so however brave you are today, whatever you did today that was courageous, just a half a shade, you know, that's like a half a step. Like, I don't have to go cut down all these oak trees somewhere tomorrow. I can just water a little seed maybe, just push myself a little bit further down the road that's in front of me, that get up and go just a little bit more. I just think that it's so important to realize that life is lived one step at a time, one breath at a time, one acceptance of the invitations at a time. So I want to read the poem again in closing, and then we'll have some chance for you to ask questions. Excuse me. So remember the question the little boy is asking is, grandfather, what do you do when you're lost in the forest? Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are, it's called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes, listen, it answers. I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Meeks. That was
Yes.
wonderful. Just a reminder to everyone who's listening in, please feel free to type your questions into the chat, and we'll get them to Dr. Meeks one at a time. So the first question, Dr. Meeks, from Cecilia, she says, I love the only preparation for the future is to learn how to live in the present. Standing still reminds me of Jehoshaphat being told to take his stand and see the deliverance the Lord will bring. Mm-hmm. I hear your comment to remain open. What is your advice on taking our stand beyond that?
Well, I think openness is probably the best thing to do, and being curious rather than judgmental. I believe. I think that I'm having to learn to be careful how I judge other people, because if I'm not careful, I might just be judging myself. So I think to be curious, to be compassionate, to be courageous. I do think it's important to be courageous. I think it's important to always know what you're willing to let go of. What are you willing to give up in order to maintain the integrity that you want to live your life by? So, and then the most important thing, I think, is to trust that God will always be there, present, called or not called. God is present. And I believe that that is actually the best tool. And I did see that someone asked the name of the poem, and it's called Lost. And it's found in David White's book, The House of Belonging, that I'm pretty sure you can just Google it and find it.
Thank you. We're getting questions from a few different places. So here's another one, Dr. Meeks. How do we acquire the skills to stand in place, as you mentioned, and stand up for truth and justice? How can we practice that while negotiating where we are in the present?
Well, it's, if you're just getting started, it's going to be a long journey. It's very important to try to look at yourself and ask some real good questions about what do you really care about, and how did you get to be who you are, and what matters to you. Because the clarity helps. Clarity about, what kind of person do you want to be? And are you really willing to see who God put you on the earth to be? Or are you just going to let other people tell you who you're supposed to be? I think maybe that's the most important thing, because I think that probably one of the biggest challenges that we have as human beings in the modern era is figuring out our own voices and then following those voices with faithfulness rather than being confused because of all the voices that have contributed to who we are, to making us who we are. You have to decipher that out and find out what your voice is and what you want to be about. I think that's probably, and that's not easy work, but it's doable work. And it's actually supposed to be what the church helps us to do. And the church doesn't do as good a job of it as it should. But that is part of the work of being in community with each other so that we get to be up against one another and people help you decipher some of this stuff, you know. So anyway, hope that helps.
Thank you. There's another question here. What are some things we can do at an individual and personal level to make change that moves us towards racial healing? I know that you touched upon this a little bit, but I think a little bit more on this would help.
Well, you know, I think you have to be, you know, that we always want to talk about love. And I don't talk about love as much as some people, because I think it's a word that we don't really know what we're talking about. And if we did, the world would be better off. But I do believe we have to spend a lot of time trying to find out, what does it really mean to love myself? And then to make sure that all of the good things that I think I need and want for myself, that I want that for everybody else. You know, I mean, we talk about love your neighbor as yourself, but basically we don't love our neighbors as ourselves. We love ourselves better than our neighbors. And then we decide that some neighbors are worth more than others. And we get into all those crazy things that creates all these systems of oppression. So what we have to do, I think, is decide whatever the good stuff is that I want for myself. Everybody on the planet wants good stuff for themselves too. And my work is to be open to helping them find the pathway to that. And so, and I may not be, you know, I may not be some big national leader or anything. I may just be this kind-hearted person that gets up every morning and my heart is open to the people who cross my path. It's not like you gotta go be Gandhi or Martin Luther King in order to do this. You've got to get up and be faithful to the gifts that you have been given. I think that to do that, and if you're white or black or brown, you have to come to grips with, there's nobody on the earth who's any worse or any better than you are. Nobody. And that to me is really like, when you get there, you kind of get off your little horse and you're kind of ready for God to help you be then whoever it is God wanted you to be.
Thank you. We have a few more questions coming in here. From Sandra, how do we invite our churches into spaces of curiosity and to try to figure out who we want to be when this pandemic ends?
You know, I don't know. I don't know. I just don't know the answer to that question. There are days when I think we need to turn all of our churches into homeless shelters or something and go have gatherings somewhere else, because we've gotten so caught up in our buildings until we forgot what the building is supposed to be about. And I think that we need to become people who are ready to ask God to help us have the courage to lay our lives down for other people. And I don't know if this long period of being separated and having to be more creative is going to tear away some of this encasement that we have made of ourselves. We've encased ourselves in a way of being that, and it's almost like a protecting ourselves from having to be vulnerable. So we create these systems, and maybe that's why people create a whole bunch of strange systems anyway. But I don't know, you know, what is it going to take for us to understand that we are a family of God's people who have some buildings and resources and stuff like that. But all those things are supposed to be used by God through us. They don't belong to us. They're not ours. They're only the tools that we need to help us. You know, it's expeditious to be able to have 100 people come to a building rather than trying to squeeze 100 people in somebody's living room. But the building is not the issue. The being there, the quality of life that you have with each other and how you go out into the world to live, that's really what that's all about. Now, what is it going to take for us to get there? Probably a whole lot more suffering, because I do believe suffering is a teacher. I do believe that when things get stripped away, unfortunately, you know, I've learned some of my best lessons when I was suffering and came out of it understanding that that I had to be more dependent on God. The real bottom line is dependence on God. And we are smart and we have so many resources until we get to the place where we think we're self-sufficient. And then we forget to be those vulnerable people and curious people and people who are willing to hold everything very lightly. So, but it's a question that I put to myself so many days and struggle with, because it matters to me. I want the church to be who God wants it to be. And I think Jesus is a good example. That's the other part of my answer. We need to pay more attention to Jesus too.
Thank you. We have lots more questions coming in. We'll do as many as we can. We have a question from the chair of our board at ECF, Ben Anderson Ray. He asks, you have spoken to how we each respond on an individual basis. What would you advise us to think about as an organization committed to helping the church in this world and environment?
Well, you know, I think the same attitude. I run the Center for Racial Healing, and I'm really preoccupied with not wanting to make it into a toxic institution. I don't want the institution, I don't want my life and work to become service to the institution. The institution needs to serve. You know, I think if we don't watch it, it's easy for us to spend a lot of energy serving our institutions rather than the institutions serving us and serving the people. So I think that it's always important institutions need to keep interrogating themselves, you know, to keep asking, well, what are we doing and why are we doing this? And what did we think we were starting out to do? We're right in the process of doing that right now at the center. We're 3 years old. And so we're interrogating, we're going through this period of interrogation. What kind of place are we really? Are we doing what we thought we set out to do? You know, and let's be careful. Let's always be careful to switch gears, to change lanes, to go to the next frontier, and to let it all go. That's the other thing, to let it all go. Can I live with my hands open? And when I sit and say to myself, well, how would it be if I didn't have it? Well, I don't know, but if God decided I don't need it, then I'll just have to take my chances on finding out what it would be like. So are we willing? How much are we willing to risk? So I think that in some ways, the same principles apply I believe, for organizations and institutions as for human beings, for individuals, but we lose sight of that and we make them into something more and we give them life and identity in a way, and then they run our lives instead of us running them if we don't watch it. So I just think there's a lot of interrogating that has to go on by us who lead institutions to make sure that we keep doing our work so that we handle that entity in a way that's life-giving and life-producing and doesn't get into being deadly.
Dan has a question that I know is on a lot of our minds. He asks, how do we bridge the gulf between divided America when that gulf seems so insurmountable?
One person at a time, one heart at a time, you know, one breath at a time, one step at a time. You know, if I have to go out and talk to everybody in Atlanta about dismantling racism and racial healing, I'm just going to go hide in the closet. because that's just too much. I can't do it. But if I can talk to one person at a time, if I can host one class at a time, if I can take one step at a time. So I think that's the kind of external work. And then the internal work is to be willing always to build bridges from one side of yourself to the other. You know, to be looking at the places inside of ourselves where we are separated from ourselves, or where we're hiding out from ourselves. Then because the internal brokenness helps to fuel the fires of the external brokenness. And the more work we do to build bridges inside of ourselves, the easier it becomes to build bridges to folks that are out there. And to, when, you know, part of the reason why we have so much division is because we're so afraid. We're afraid of ourselves in some ways, and then we're afraid of each other. And then we set up all kinds of constructs to justify why I should be afraid. And we need to make sure that we don't get caught in that trap, that we each day keep working on trying to be as like a half a shade braver, push myself just a little further, say hello to somebody in the grocery store who doesn't look like me, that I would not want to really speak to, but I'm going to say hello anyway. And I'm going to have this conversation with myself, and I'm going to say hello. I'm going to be a little more courageous the next time I see somebody who doesn't look like me, who, instead of responding with fear, let me say, you know, that person's got God inside of them, and let me respond to them that way instead of being afraid of them. But it's one day, one step at a time. And we can be intentional. We can make our communities more intentional. I'm not suggesting that we can't do those things, but even all of that, still, it's about individual people turning their intention in that direction and being willing to still take one step at a time, because you can only breathe one breath at a time.
Thank you, Dr. Meeks. There are a bunch of other questions that I think you've answered in what you've said. I'll just, there's this one comment that I'd love to read out from Deborah. She says, she was really moved by your comment that God loves the people we disagree with or who hate us as much as God does us. And of course it's true. But a lot of people are being challenged right now by a moral horror at the actions of our neighbors, which is challenging our ability to love them. What are some practices we can use to regain and retain compassion and reverence for those on the other side of this divide?
So the first thing we have to do is quit being judgmental. You know, so people do things that are wrong and bad, but you know, this is not a plea to not name bad behavior or hold people accountable. I imagine you understand that. But the first thing to do is to try to see people beyond their faults. You know, Howard Thurman says that real love, the love that God has for people, is to see people beyond all of their faults and beyond all of their abilities, to see beyond all of that and see what is there. Now, we don't take much time to be trying to figure all that out about people. We always look at folks and it's like, do I like you? Do you look right? Do you sound right? Am I going to feel pretty good being in your presence? If I'm not, then I'm probably going to just write you off pretty quickly. So we have to get past writing people off on the basis of externals. And, you know, I'm not going to go out into the woods to a Ku Klux Klan rally just trying to find out how courageous I am. But if I have to engage somebody with that kind of energy, then may God give me the grace to be gracious and to be loving and kind. And I think every day we have to pray and hope and for loving kindness. And we have to always be working on ourselves so that we're not projecting our own stuff onto other people, even folks that are doing stuff that's not too good. But, you know, most of you maybe know Brian Stevenson, the young lawyer in Alabama from the Equal Justice Initiative, who has worked with getting folks off death row and has worked with some people who've done some really bad things. And he says, Nobody is the sum of the worst thing they've ever done. You're not the sum of the worst thing you've ever done. And when God looks at us, God sees beyond what we've done or didn't do. And if I want to try to be what God wants me to be, I need to at least be open to the possibility of some of that kind of energy coming in my direction, and not make up my mind that this stuff you're doing is just, I'm just going to judge you and put you over here in this box, and that's the end of you. You know, well, if I do that, then I shut myself off to the energy of love. And it's not easy. That's the other thing. You know, we always, Rilke says that we're always trying to organize our lives around the easy and the easiest of the easy. And so it's not, but the real work is to hold to the difficult, to hold to the difficult. So in this kind of stuff that we're talking about requires us to hold to the difficult, because it's not easy.
Thank you, Dr. Meeks. This has just been really thought-provoking, inspiring, and I think this reminder to stand still is something that will hold us all well, especially for the coming weeks and months. So thank you so much. As we wind up, I would like to invite Donald Romanek, the president of Episcopal Church Foundation, to offer some closing comments and send us off. Thank you so much.
All right, it's great to be here. He's muted.
Donald, you're muted.
Thank you, Dr. Meeks. Your words were comforting, inspiring, challenging. And personally, I like the idea of kind of, being at peace and still, because what I got out of your talk is that if any of us want to be agents for reconciliation and healing in the world, we have to be reconciled and healed within ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very important message. Dr. Meeks' talk tonight is in the context of our board of directors meeting, which is usually in person in New York, and obviously it's virtual this year. And your words about, and tomorrow, Dr. Meeks, we're going to do some interrogation, looking at who ECF is and what we feel called to do. And I love your image of letting everything go, and even starting from scratch if that's necessary. About a year ago, Karis came to me and said, Donald, I'd like to do a Vestry Papers 2-issue edition on racial justice, racial reconciliation. And it's something we've never done before at ECF. And I said, I think it's a great idea. Little did we know that this Vestry Papers articles would come out in the midst of this incredible pandemic of racial unrest and COVID and everything else. And if you have not looked at those articles, I commend them to you. Karis will put some links on the screen. We are also maintaining a hub of resources on racial justice, racial reconciliation, because a lot of congregations, especially white congregations, don't know how to even begin that conversation. So sometimes you have to start at a very basic level, and we hope that will be helpful for you. And we at ECF are continuing to struggle with what, as an organization that was founded and nurtured in white privilege, what we can do to advance this discussion as a place that convenes and creates and curates and continues to discern what God is calling us to do. So stay tuned. We really feel this is an important part of who we are as an organization, who we are as a church, and who we are as people of God, trying to journey with our fellow human beings in this broken world. So thank you everyone for joining us. There'll be more opportunities to engage this issue. Dr. Meeks, love and blessings. It's been wonderful getting to know you. And in fact, Dr. Meeks and I spend a good hour just telling each other our stories, because it often begins with telling our stories. And then all of a sudden, that person's no longer a stranger,
Right.
but a friend. So anyway,
That's right.
thank you all. God bless. Let's take Dr. Meeks's advice and stay calm and let the votes be counted, and all will be well. Let us bless
Good
the
night.
Lord.
Thank you. It was good to be here.